you. Hello and welcome to ExpensiCon X again. My name is Maria Di Costa, and today I am excited to be presenting a topic that I think unites us all. A topic that is honestly one of the reasons that we're here in the first place. We are working towards building this amazing global community, and we want to make sure that it's open to everyone. Everyone is valued to participate. Everyone is respected, heard, and of course, everyone's inherent worth and dignity are recognized. So, and some of the most important ways that we can do that is in the way that we talk to each other, the way that we collaborate with each other. So inclusion is something that the way that we've set up our community, the way that our processes work, we want to make sure that it's kind of woven into the fabric of this community overall. But that doesn't mean that there isn't scope for improvement. Of course, it means that we need to be aware of it and how we're impacted by it. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Maria Di Costa. I am a software engineer at Expensify, coming up to 3 years now. That is me on the slide there too. I am an advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and as part of that, I help run a women in tech group in Dubai, where I am currently based. Our aim being to give women a safe space to just network or chat or build skills together. And we want to make sure this is a safe environment for women who are studying in tech or working in tech or looking to transition into the field. And of course, one of our goals is to continue to expand our group's reach and continue to empower women throughout the Middle East. So just reiterating some of the things that we already went through today at the keynote, but how are our two rules actually tied in with inclusion? So as part of getting shit done in this community, we do have to talk to each other, and it has to happen across borders and across boundaries. Our second rule being, not to ruin it for anyone else. And part of that is in this community, we make sure that not only does everyone have a seat at the table, but also everyone at that table is heard, valued, and respected. So it doesn't matter if you're an internal employee or an external contributor, everyone is treated with the same level of respect and dignity. Also, our 3 life goals kind of also tie in with inclusion. The first one to be being live rich. A lot of us spend a lot of our time at work, right? And as part of this community, we make sure that you can bring yourself unhindered to work. There's no red tape, there's no bureaucracy. You can be vocal about your ideas, and you can actually enact real change. And that's obviously evidenced by how far Expensify Chat has come with the support of this amazing community. Our next life goal is to have fun, and I think it's an incredibly fun experience, as this conference also is part of, to be able to interact with people from diverse cultures who speak different languages from all over the world. I think it's an incredibly rewarding experience. Our last life goal, save the world. While it's a huge endeavor, I think all of us want to make a meaningful dent in some of the world's toughest problems. And some of those problems include discrimination. It includes unconscious biases or cultural and societal norms that perpetuate inclusion or a lack of access to opportunities. So the way that our community works is that we want to make sure that everyone succeeds, everyone has what they need in order to succeed, and that, of course, we provide equal access to opportunities. So it doesn't matter where you're from, where you're located. We obviously want you to be part of this valuable community. And of course, we are building this amazing chat platform together, and people are going to be talking to each other across all over the world. So we want to make sure that we are aware of inclusion and how it impacts everyone. So in terms of today's session, we are going to have a panel talk with some amazing Expensifiers. I'm really excited to hear about their insights, and we're going to hear some really concrete examples of inclusion and how they have been impacted by it. We're going to reserve the last half of this session to a group discussion, because we would like to give you in the audience some time to reflect on your own experiences. So we'll split you into groups and provide you with certain prompts. But yeah, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Amy Evans. Amy is a software engineer at Expensify. She has 6 years of experience in headless WordPress development and React as well. She has served as the lead developer on teams with varying demographics, and she has been a peer coach for 3 years as well, and is super passionate about inclusion in tech. So welcome, Amy. Our next panelist is John Schuster. John is a success coach at Expensify with nearly 10 years of experience in account and support. Beyond coaching, John is a peer mentor and a champion of Expensify's culture and is passionate about unblocking people to engage more fully with their lives and work. So, welcome, John. Our final panelist is Carlos Alvarez. Carlos is originally from Venezuela and has been with Expensify for 10 years. As a director, he is passionate about helping his peers grow. As an engineer, he works across the stack and is very passionate about making everyone feel welcome and a big promoter of our inclusive and open environment as well. So welcome, Carlos. Awesome, so thank you panelists for being here. I think this is a very important conversation to have. I think as part of the Expensify community, whether we're working here, whether we're contributing here, we are fortunate to have this very open and collaborative community. And I think that can come with some challenges as well. Both some benefits and some challenges. You know, for example, all of our conversations are posted openly on Slack. So let's begin by talking about what an inclusive community means to each of you. And I think we'd like to hear some really concrete examples of inclusion as well. So, Amy?
Yeah, thanks, Maria. I mean, I think to me, an inclusive community is one where you feel valued, you feel seen, and that you're quite literally included. You know, I've only been at Expensify for about a year now. At my previous job, we had teams where we were close-knit, but it felt really exclusive. And so I had this worry moving over to Expensify that, you know, it'd be hard to break into these teams, into these social circles where people have been here for 8 years, 10 years, you know, everyone's relatively tenured. And so I remember, you know, I showed up a Sunday in Canada, you know, it was my first international trip with everyone, you know, perhaps how some of you felt yesterday. And I was a bit worried. I was like, what am I going to do for food? Who am I going to eat with? Just like basic questions. But that fear went away pretty quickly because we had, you know, a social channel and people started reaching out like, I'm going for drinks here, going for food, like who wants to hop on this with me? And one of the things that really enables that here is we have a policy that if you want to be able to expense your social event or your meal, like you have to include everyone. Everyone needs to be invited. But I love that. Like it made it super easy to break in, to get to know people. And yeah, like forming those relationships and like building that trust, like the impact it has on our day-to-day ability to get shit done is just like amazing. Like we can have difficult conversations over Slack. We can, you know, feel free to disagree with each other because we have that foundation of trust.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And Carlos, I think we'd like to hear from someone who's been, you know, Expensify for like nearly a decade now. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one way I like to think about what an inclusive community is, or an inclusive environment, is an environment where good ideas and good results can come from anyone and from anywhere. And I think this conference is a good testament to that. But going back to the Slack example is really good because we essentially put the conversations in public and anybody can just come back to the conversation on their own time, catch up, chime in, and add value to the discussion, which is really powerful. But that doesn't really solve all the problems that we have. You know, we have really good retention and we're proud of it. But that means that, for instance, a newer employee, you know, when we onboard them, if we're having a conversation on Slack about a technical discussion and stuff like that, it can be hard for them to disagree with me, push back against someone that is a director that has, you know, 10 years of tenure at Expensify. And so one thing that I try to do is I try to meet with every new hire. I set up a call, very casual, maybe like 15 minutes. We have a normal conversation. I introduce myself and my role. I get to know them a little bit. But one of the main things I try to convey is that I'm on their team as well. It's not that I'm going to give them work and that I'm actually going to delegate work that I don't want to do. Is that I'm a resource to them. They can ask me questions. And in fact, I always joke that I have 10 years under my belt and I have all the answers to all the questions, and that if I don't, that I can probably find the right person that has it, just as a way to encourage people to ask me questions. And so, that doesn't solve every problem, but even going before we onboard employees, when I lead interviews, I try not to dress up too businessy or too formally to avoid giving the impression that there's some sort of hierarchy that doesn't exist at Expensify, or that I'm some sort of higher up. I always try to make sure that when it comes to conversations about technical discussions and stuff like that, I make it clear that my director role doesn't have any weight there, But it's something that is not easy to disconnect yourself from. It's hard to take that director hat off sometimes. And I think the best example that we have in an inclusive community is this, because this is a true testament that ideas and results can come from anywhere and anybody, because we have people from all over the world kind of collaborating with us right now, right here in real time, but also asynchronous via Slack. So now we're getting work done 24/7, Sunday through Sunday, every day. And even small things, I remember when we were opening the Portland office, it was going to be a bigger office, it was going to be more modern because it was new, and a lot of us were moving from San Francisco to Portland, including the CEO, David Barrett. And so people were asking me all the time if we were moving the headquarters, or where are the HQs, what's the main office? And I remember giving almost the exact same answer every time. I always said, San Francisco and Portland are our biggest offices, but we have a big office in Michigan too. We have people in Australia, we have people in New York, we have people just remotely spread all over the world. And I think, again, just to come back to that initial idea, it's just a good example that we do think that results and good ideas can come from anywhere.
100%, yeah, and I definitely agree that this conference is a prime example of inclusion. So I think another interesting aspect about our community is that we're all from such diverse places. We speak different languages, we come from different cultures. So what do we actually bring as a result of that? What do we bring from our different upbringings or different backgrounds? Like for me, for example, growing up in the society that I didn't really encourage asking questions or speaking up, and especially as a woman, don't challenge the status quo. So I feel like I bring a lot of the hesitation to conversation. I bring sort of a fear of being dismissed or ignored, or eliciting a negative response from the other person as well. So what kind of challenges do we bring as part of our different diverse backgrounds, and how do we sort of navigate that as well? Shall we start with Amy?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges that I face on a personal level is just the need to be perfect. And I think culturally, growing up in the US for boys, you're kind of taught, take risks, go play in the mud, get dirty. There's this encouragement that they don't need to be perfect. Whereas for girls, it's more you should embody this picture of a graceful ballerina and be seen, not heard. And just that aspect has been something I've wrestled with my whole life. I remember I took an intro to CS class in high school, and I honestly loved the class, but I had an A. I wasn't getting an A+. And even though my teacher was encouraging me to continue, that voice in my head was just enough to be no, we're not going on with this career path right now. And it took almost a decade to get back into it for me. And I feel even on a daily basis, right, as developers, we encounter so many bugs. They're inevitable. You're eventually going to cause a deploy blocker. You're going to have to write a postmortem. And I remember writing my first one a couple months ago, and it felt like the world was going to end. I was just so upset with myself. But the team, people from other backgrounds, they've helped me to realize that they helped me to see it in a different way, right? That it wasn't the end of the world, that it's okay to make mistakes, that we can grow from them. For example, our bug zero process, we're looking at what can we do to change the way that we look at bugs so that we prevent them in the future. It's more about refining the processes. It's not about who made the mistake, oh my goodness, let's call them out. No, that's not the point. And yeah, so I really love that, that we have such a diverse team, and that we can just bring awareness to the challenges that we all face, help us to move through them.
Yeah, definitely. And I do appreciate the fact that there isn't a blame culture at Expensify. It's not about who made the mistake, more about okay, let's fix it. And yeah, I do think that Expensify does provide that sort of supportive environment where, like, we bring negative things with us from wherever we come from, but we are able to like work on them and improve that. But what do you think, John?
Yeah, thanks. So I came from kind of a shame-based culture myself. So while I grew up in America, I did not have that same experience of like, go get your hands dirty. I grew up in a background, kind of in my own personal life, where I was not shown how to engage, and I wasn't shown really how to emotionally engage. So I wound up, from a young age, thinking that failure would be the death of me. And how that perpetuated into my life as a younger person is I had to also be perfect in a different way. So I had to be the expert in any field of interest for my friends so I wouldn't die. And what that brought into my tenure into Expensify, from a very early time, I had to specialize. I had to be right in some weird-ass esoteric field, which was cool. Like, I'm not mad about it. But for the first few years of my time at Expensify, I always felt the other boot was going to drop. The culture was too good to be true. The space was too safe for me. And the challenge and how I had to fight that was I had to call bullshit on the culture. Like every single time I was afraid that I was going to make a mistake, I had to look at the culture and say, well, this says this, but is it true? And it was difficult. It was really challenging for me to be okay with that. But time and again, I'd have folks like Puneet or Jason who I'd interact with on a daily basis at the start, and they were more tenured than I was. And I was like, oh shit, what's going to happen? They have something to say. Uh-oh. And truly, these folks were here to help me grow, to provide a safe space for me to fail fast and learn from that mistake. And so what I want to offer to you is the way that I unwound that was to call bullshit on the culture.
Awesome. So I think one of the interesting aspects about any community, or just generally interact with people in general, is that it's inevitable that you're going to come across a situation where you're interacting with someone who has a completely different view, and they might be, very strongly held opinions. It might be difficult to sort of like advocate for yourself, or like sometimes the other person might not be willing to hear your perspective, or might be dismissive of your perspective as well. And I personally find myself very like physically tense in those situations, and it's definitely hard to get through. So what are some ways that we can facilitate respectful and constructive dialogue, especially like when people are holding such different opinions? Carlos?
Yeah, thank you. So I think I'm a professional disagreeer, so hopefully I can speak a little bit to this. I push back on everybody, everything, even David Barrett, whenever he has an idea. But one of my favorite tips that we have, and it's in our manifesto, is to always assume good intentions from our team. And I think that's incredibly powerful because it allows us to communicate very effectively without kind of second guessing what we're saying. And when everybody's essentially in that mindset that any criticism is constructive and that any pushback is just done to refine whatever proposal you're putting forward and refine a solution, then amazing things can happen. I remember somebody told me the other day, hey, I found this bug, I saw this PR, and like I'm not sure like how to ask. And I was like, just tag them. And they were like, seriously? It's like, yeah, they're not going to feel like you're putting them on the spot or anything. They're just going to be familiar with the code that broke the thing, so they're just going to help you, right? And they were taking it back. It's like it was with a new employee, and I was like, yeah, no, just do it. And it worked out. It was fine. They immediately like knew what the problem was, and they immediately jumped to solve it too. And another tip that I like that goes hand in hand with this one is that when you're writing something, and a lot of what we do at Expensify, because we're remote first, is in writing. So when you're writing something, assume bad intentions from everybody. And this isn't to say that we will, as readers, as the receivers of this information, but it's a good exercise because it helps you crystallize the idea and make sure that you're not presenting in a way that's ambiguous and that people can interpret it in a way that you don't want. So it's just a good exercise to get into the habit of doing. But I guess to answer the actual question, which is how do we deal with disagreements and with that feeling of discomfort? Well, first, I think that's something that doesn't fully disappear. Like, again, I've spent 10 years of my career at Expensify pushing back and disagreeing with people. And I still feel that sort of discomfort. That's normal because you're essentially going against what somebody else put time and effort to propose. So I think that's something that we have to get used to working with and kind of overcoming. And which happens with like anything, with practice. We just get better at working through this. And we try to be respectful and be open to input from anybody. Our design process actually asks you to put something together, maybe consult with a couple of people, and then literally send it to everybody in the company. And then everybody has to find flaws with your solution, poke holes in it, propose alternatives to what you're saying. And so it's important that we're always in the mindset of like, we're working together to improve this and not seeing this kind of stuff, this disagreement or pushback as just like a personal attacks or something that is trying to hold us back or anything like that.
Yeah, awesome. I do agree with assuming intention. I think sometimes, especially with online communication, it's hard to gauge like stuff like which is not there, like tone or body language. And so I think assuming intention is definitely helpful. What do you think, John?
Yeah. So in some of those tough threads, I don't know about you. Well, actually, you kind of mentioned it, where you're like, sometimes I just feel a lot of like tense. Like I feel really tense in my body. And for those conversations, I find that. The best thing to do is to stop, take a deep breath, go, hey, what's going on in me? And then actually to DM that person and say, hey, look, I'm having a really hard time engaging in this conversation. Oftentimes when we use I statements, we're saying, hey, here's where I am coming from. I'm not necessarily looking for the other person to then like say, oh no, gosh, I'm so sorry. It's just that I'm looking to validate my side of the street so that I can continue to engage the conversation. So I might come in and say, hey, I'm having a really hard time. It feels like I get this feeling that you don't want to hear this, or however you want to posture that. But in the end, it's from a place of, this is my take. I'm having a hard time engaging. I do believe that we want to get this thing to the same place together, and see if you can reset that conversation by just being vulnerable.
Yeah, I do agree with being honest and like confronting the person one-on-one. I think it doesn't really solve a lot of problems if we did that more. So I think when it comes to talking about inclusion, I feel like some people still might have some misconceptions about it, or might even sort of devalue its importance, like, why should we care? Why does it even matter? For example, the concepts of diversity, equity, inclusion are not really something that people are exposed to where I'm coming from. For me, I kind of lumped in diversity and inclusion together, thinking like, if you have a diverse team, that means you're automatically being inclusive. But that's not actually the case. And I think it was after I heard the second episode of Expensify's podcast, on Spotify though, featuring Zanel Mutafar-Roan, who is a diversity and culture strategist, when she described diversity as, who's invited to the party, and inclusion as like who's asked to dance. And I was like, okay, that makes so much sense. So what do you think are some misconceptions, or how would you respond if someone went like, why does inclusion even matter? Let's start with John again.
Yeah, cool. I feel like I'm kind of always being reminded of my biases. All the time I might be like, oh wow, I didn't realize that. Something that struck me though, during the Trevor Noah interview, he had said, he was talking about this exact concept, so inclusivity and equality and equity. And one thing that really struck me, that my bias was, hey, if you include everybody now, then they're already on fair footing. So that was my bias. And my understanding, as I have kind of peeled back the layers, is that no, that's not really true. Folks with different backgrounds have been given different tools. And the tools they've been given at different points in their lives have set them on a particular trajectory over time. And so my experience and your experience might be drastically different. And your skill set in a particular field is going to be drastically different than mine. And when I come to the conversation with that understanding, I can come to that conversation and empathize and hear from your point of view. Hearing from your history and your background, I can then also understand where you're coming from. And again, ultimately, I think the goal is that we can move the needle forward, that we can move this thing together, knowing that we see it from different points of view, and that's a strength, not a weakness.
What do you think, Carlos?
I think another big misconception that we've learned that's not the case is that DEI comes at the expense of the business. And that's not always true. In fact, there are cases where we can benefit the business and then increase, or improve in DEI. One example that we have is a $20 like lunch budget that we have. So essentially the idea is that every workday you get $20 and you get to spend it on lunch. And this came, like the original idea was for us to test our own product. So kind of like the dog fooding that we were talking about earlier. And we scan receipts, we send the emails, and we really test the product. But better than that and more valuable than that is that via that lunch budget, we create an opportunity for everybody to like go out together to get lunch and then spend some time, get to know each other better, and really just mingle with your coworkers. And that's super powerful. That's one of the things that remove some barriers because once you interact with someone, once you get to know them, and you're going to see this is going to happen very quickly, after today, and even more after the conference is done, you're going to be more likely to ask them questions, to like bug them, interrupt them when they're working, and less hesitant about, they might be busy. I don't want to trouble them. I'm always telling people, if I don't answer on Slack, maybe I'll come back to it. Maybe I'm busy right now and I don't read it immediately, but I'll always try to reply, even if it's to say I'm not available. So that's another misconception that we have. I also read somewhere that 99% of disagreements all stem from, or 99% of arguments all stem from the disagreement of one word. And in this case, diversity, equity, and inclusion, all three are very broad words. They have, they can be applied in many, many contexts. And that ambiguity, I think, lends itself to think that we're disagreeing with each other when we can be talking about the same things, whether it's positive or negative. So one example, you could potentially say, our Expensify team is incredibly diverse because we have a wealth of nationalities and backgrounds and cultures and languages, you name it, right? But you could also say, that female identifying employees are underrepresented in the engineering team. Both things are true, but you could also say, our team is very diverse, or you could say our team is not diverse enough. And those are very broad, and they can be interpreted. It's very easy for someone to say, hey, your team is not diverse enough, and what I'm going to feel is like, that's kind of an accusation. We've put a lot of work to making this an inclusive environment, so I'm already like taken aback by that. So a lot of times, it's very useful to just clarify the language that you're using and make sure that you're actually talking about the same things and not kind of talking past each other.
Awesome. Yeah, so I think there's a lot to talk about when it comes to inclusion, but if you were to tell the audience one thing that they could start doing tomorrow to make sure that this community is getting even more inclusive, what would that be?
I'll start. Okay. Mine is going back to my first idea, which is assume good intentions. You can disagree with someone very fiercely and very passionate about one thing, but it's possible that you agree with them on 99% of all the other things. So make sure that you're using clear language and always assuming good intentions.
Yeah, I think for me, it's about like tone and how you can convey that in writing. And one of the most powerful tools there is just using emojis. And we had emoji reactions merged last week, so you can react as well now. So yeah, that would be my one tip.
My one tip, I think, would be to get to know folks. I find that by getting to know a person's history, background, their point of view, you'll find more commonalities than differences. And when you come to argue toe-to-toe about any number of things, you'll have that to stand on, that you'll have a common ground that you can stand on when things get heated, and that you can always come back to that.
Awesome, thank you. I think this has been a really insightful conversation. But yeah, I think we'll have to move on though. But thank you so much for speaking and for taking the time out. So please take a minute to, hopefully this works, but to scan the QR code and join the room. And if you have any questions or if any comments or suggestions, we'd love to hear it, and we will get back to you in the group chat as well. But thank you, panelists. I think you can join the audience. Awesome. So we're moving on to the group discussion part of this session. So I'd love for you to just grab 3 or 4 people closest to you and take the next 2 minutes to, say hello. But before we get to that, I'd love to go over the rules of engagement because we just want to make sure that this is a safe space for everybody. So obviously, just be respectful, be compassionate, come with an open mind, be honest about your experiences, have the courage to be vulnerable. Obviously pay attention when someone is like speaking. And if someone tells you something in confidentiality, don't repeat it outside of this room, things like that. And of course, no judgment. But yeah, please grab 3 or 4 people closest to you and just take 2 minutes to say hello, introduce yourself if you don't know them already. Okay, so yeah, our first prompt is to think about a situation or maybe even a conversation that you felt was inclusive or something that was not inclusive, something that, that made you feel comfortable or uncomfortable. And what would you change to make it more inclusive? So that is your first prompt. You can have the next 3 minutes to think about that. All right, everyone, since we're coming towards the end of this session, I'd like to leave you with a final note. And you can reflect on this throughout this week and even beyond. What could Expensify do to make sure that our community is as inclusive as possible? So please reflect on that during this week and even after. But beyond that, thank you for being part of this. And of course, if you want to talk more, please feel free to drop a message in the group chat. Thank you to our panelists and to our speaker mentor, Puneet, Lath. Thank you to Joni, who inspired a lot of this conversation but wasn't unable to be here. And thank you to my to my mentor, John Lee, who isn't here but helped me a lot with this entire session. So thank you.